Hi, I'm Emily Rolander, and I'm a freshman at the University of Vermont, and I take the Deviance and Social Control class at UVM. And for this project, we watched the documentary CitizenFour, and it's by Laura Poitras, and it's a documentary about how Edward Snowden decided to leak the information about the NSA and how they were like surveillancing all the citizens, and he basically just wanted to get the information out because he was working for them and he realized it was wrong. So, Edward Snowden worked for Booz Allen Hamilton, which was in the NSA, and his job was to help them come up with methods to like gain power for the company, for like the NSA. And he decided that he wanted to stand up against the NSA because he thought it was wrong that they were surveillancing all the citizens, like phone calls, texts, emails, and all that, and they didn't know what was going on. And he wanted to ultimately publish what they were doing and what they did. He originally fled to Hong Kong in order to meet with the not leader, but a guy who worked for The Guardian, and his name was Glenn Greenwald, and to also meet with Laura, the woman who was making the film, so he could tell them the information, and then they could tell news stations, so that it could then be published and publicized through the news stations. So one of the main themes of the film was about how Snowden wanted to release the information about the NSA surveillancing, about how they were monitoring cell phone calls, texts, emails, etc. about like of all the citizens, and like how it ultimately violates the Patriot Act, which I kind of thought was a core issue. And the Patriot Act stands for Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Interfere and Obstruct Terrorism. And the Patriot Act was made after 9/11, so the government could like surveillance people that they were suspicious of being involved in crime or terrorism. And this act gave a lot of power to the government and NSA, and in order for them to obtain information and data from citizens. But the reason that this was violating the Patriot Act in my eyes, and I'm sure a lot of citizens or most of the citizens, was because the Patriot Act gave the government the right and power and ability to surveillance anybody they were suspicious of, but now in this situation they were just doing it to anyone, not necessarily people they were suspicious of, which ultimately wasn't okay, and which is why Edward Snowden wanted this to get published. And another major theme of the film is that citizens in general don't feel comfortable with the government having this much control over them, because they were surveillancing their cell phone calls, text, emails, and stuff like that. And this gives them a lot of control over the citizens. And this is ultimately taking away their liberty and freedom. And one of the core values of the U.S. is to have a freedom of speech, but if citizens are being surveillanced about things like phone calls and texts and stuff, and they're talking about something they disagree upon, then it's basically taking away their freedom of speech. And you can't really have a private conversation with someone if it's being surveillanced constantly. So one thing I liked about the film was that I thought it was really interesting how Snowden didn't want to remain anonymous, but he insisted that he wasn't the story. This showed that he thought it was very important for the information to get out, but rather than it be the main focus that he was the guy who released this information from the NSA, he wanted the fact that what they were doing was to be the main point. He didn't, like, of course people were going to find out he was the guy who leaked it, but he didn't want to be the center of attention. And he didn't want to be anonymous because he didn't want the government to think he was afraid of them, because he wasn't. He just wanted to get this information out. And another thing I liked was how, again, Edward Snowden was really courageous and he didn't want to hide. And he knew that other people were thinking the same thing as him, but he was the only one working for the NSA that was courageous enough to stand up and get this information out. And another thing I liked was how in the film itself, I liked how they showed the information and emails that were sent back and forth between Snowden and Laura, because it showed how real the situation was and how private the messages needed to be kept so Edward Snowden could be hidden from the news stations, I guess, until the information was officially released and stuff. And also keep him hidden until he actually met up with Laura and Glenn in order to talk to them about this information. And it showed how important it was for him to stay hidden. And then moving on to what I didn't like, at the beginning of the documentary, they showed the NSA director, Keith Alexander, in a courtroom, and a guy was just asking him questions, and so a guy asked him about what the NSA does and if they routinely are surveillancing citizens, and Keith Alexander, who was the NSA director, directly lied to this guy, and I did not like that at all, because he straight up said that the NSA does not routinely intercept American citizens' emails, cell phone conversations, Google searches, and all of that. I just thought that was not appropriate at all, because now we know that it was a lie. Another thing I didn't like about just the setup of the film was how Laura's voice was just kind of like a voiceover in the background, because at first it was really confusing to me because I didn't know whose voice it was, but at the end of the movie I knew it was Laura talking, and even though I didn't like it at first, I thought it was kind of interesting in the end. And another thing I didn't really like was how it seemed really relaxed when they were filming. They were just chatting in a hotel room, and it seemed like a very relaxed way, and Snowden was very composed through the whole thing. And I kind of thought that maybe he would have been a little more high-strung, because the moment he released the information, his whole life would ultimately be ruined. But I guess the fact that he was getting this information out outweighed the fact that his life could be ruined in his eyes. And the last thing I didn't really like about the film was that it made me slightly uncomfortable, because it made me feel like I was getting let in on a big secret about the NSA, and it felt like watching the movie that all of the U.S. citizens still don't know about what's going on, but like they actually do. And it felt like I was actually in the room with Edward Snowden, Glenn Greenwald, and Laura Poitras as they talked about this situation and how they were going to publicize this and all that, and discuss what was going to happen afterwards. It felt like I was actually there with them, which was kind of unnerving, because it made me realize how big of a deal this situation was. And one of the things that kind of was like a big thought in my head was Edward Snowden a hero, or was he more of a traitor, and like did he violate the Espionage Act? And the Espionage Act performed many forms of speech, like profane things and abusive language, against the government. And in this case, he was really violating the government, because he went behind their back after working for them to release all of this information. So in terms of the government, they might think that he was a traitor, but the U.S. citizens may have thought of him as a hero, because he did release all of this information that in my eyes, the U.S. citizen should know is going on. Um, and I also was wondering, did he feel guilty about releasing this information? Um, like, because I don't agree with government surveillance, but I was just wondering how long it actually took for him to decide to release this information, because I would feel slightly guilty because he was going against the government, but um, he did really want to get the information out. And I guess he knew that he would probably and possibly get arrested for committing this act, but it was just important that he got the information out that he needed to get out. And overall, I really liked this documentary because I liked learning about what Edward Snowden did and the processes that he had to go through to finally get this information out about the government surveillance and the people he had to talk to, and like how he had to flee to Hong Kong in order to do this, and how he's still in hiding right now. Because before taking this class, I didn't even know who Edward Snowden was, and watching this documentary was really, really helpful, and I definitely know a lot more about him and this whole situation than I did before, and overall it was really interesting.